He thought it was just coffee, a hot, stinging splash of humiliation that would be forgotten by lunch. He had no idea that single, careless act of cruelty was about to awaken an ancient, elemental power that had slept for 1,000 years, and that the entity he had just insulted was now absolutely, cosmically furious. My name is Isatu. Before that day, my world was small. It was the same route I walked every single morning, a path that led me from my family's humble compound, always filled with laughter and the smell of sizzling onions, to the silent, sterile mansion of the richest man in Dakar. In a city buzzing with life, with a salt from the Atlantic tangles with the scent of street food and the call to prayer, my job was to be invisible, just a ghost in a blue paint and white head wrap, there to clean up messes and disappear. I was so wrong. I wasn't a ghost. I was a guardian, and I'd been sleeping for way too long. The man I worked for, Monsieur Ndaya, was a giant in a city of men. He owned hotels that scraped the sky and drove a black Mercedes that drank gasoline like other men drank water. Heavy gold rings were on every single finger, catching the light whenever he waved his hands with that casual, dismissive way of his. His house was a palace of glass and imported marble, a stark white fortress, standing against the vibrant, chaotic beauty of Senegal. I moved through its halls like a shadow, my bare feet silent on the cold floors. I was always so careful not to disturb his treasures. Fragile glass sculptures from Paris, ancient, silent drums from Casamance. That morning, the sun was a fierce, white eye in the sky, the heat shimmering off the asphalt. I was polishing the giant television screen when his voice cracked through the silence like a whip. Isatu, my coffee. Now! I hurried to the kitchen, my heart fluttering nervously. The coffee he drank wasn't the sweet, spice cafe Talbot we have here, the kind that tastes like community. His was a bitter, black import from a world away. I poured it into his favorite cup, the one with the delicate blue fish, my hand shaking just a little. As I walked back into the living room, my foot slipped on a tiny, unseen puddle on the tile. The whole world just slowed down. The cup tilted in this graceful, horrifying arc. The scalding black liquid exploded across the front of his pristine white caftan. It splashed onto his thick arm. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that stole the air from my lungs. He looked down at the spreading brown stain, then up at my face. His eyes, usually just dismissive, were now filled with a cold, hard rage. He shot up from his chair, towering over me like a statue of fury. "You stupid, clumsy girl." The words bounced off the high ceilings. I could feel the other staff watching. The housekeeper by the door, the guards outside, all of them looking away, not wanting to see it. I tried to apologize. The words stuck in my throat, but my mouth was as dry as dust. He lunged and shoved me. He didn't use his palm. He used the back of his hand. His collection of gold rings raked across my forearm, leaving a trail of fire on my skin. I stumbled backward and fell hard on the floor. The string of my grandmother's wooden beads, my lucky beads, snapped. They scattered across the tiles, skittering away like frightened insects. He didn't offer a hand. He just sneered, pulled a thick wad of cash from his pocket, and threw it at my feet. "For the dress," he spat. "Now get out of my sight." I didn't take the money. I scrambled up, gathered a few beads I could find, and ran to the small staff bathroom. I gripped the sink, my whole body shaking. When I looked in the mirror, I saw the long, angry scratch on my arm. But then, for a single, heart-stopping second, something else happened. My reflection's eyes, they weren't my eyes. They flashed with a cold, pale light, ancient and furious. A whisper slithered through my mind, a language I'd never heard but understood completely. It said, "A debt has been made." Just like that, the burning pain in my arm vanished, replaced by an unnerving, humming cold. That night, sleep offered no escape, only a different kind of terror. I dreamt vividly of a woman. She was impossibly tall and regal, her skin adorned with ancient gold that coiled around her arms and neck like living serpents. Her face was my own, but it was stern, powerful, and etched with the wisdom of ages. Her eyes held that same cold, pale light from a mirror. In the dream, she stood on a vast, dark shore as a massive tidal wave rose from the ocean, a wall of water meant to destroy everything. She just held up a single hand, not to stop it, but to command it with absolute authority. I woke up with my heart pounding in my chest, the distinct smell of salt and ozone filling my tiny landlocked room. The next day, that humming cold was still locked in my arm, a permanent reminder of the incident. And at home, strange, unsettling things started to happen. As I replayed the humiliation in my mind, just seething with a helpless anger I had no outlet for, a heavy clay pot of water sitting on the table suddenly cracked clean in half, spilling its contents across the floor. Later, when my rage peaked again at the memory of his sneering face, the single, fragile light bulb in our room flickered violently and died, plunging us into darkness. Terrified by these events, I finally went to my grandmother, my meme. I showed her the scratch. It hadn't healed like a normal cut. It was now a pale, silvery scar that was cold to the touch and seemed to thrum with a faint energy of its own. She took my arm, her old, wrinkled fingers tracing the mark with profound reverence. A look of recognition, mixed with a deep-seated fear and awe, crossed her face. "Isatu," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of her words. "This is no ordinary wound. This is a key." She led me to an old carved wooden chest I hadn't seen open in my entire life. From inside, she pulled out a small leather-bound journal and a single, heavy earring made of dark, tarnished gold. She explained that our family didn't just come from the fishermen on the coast. Our bloodline was older, more powerful. She told me of the Djinn, powerful, elemental spirits of earth, wind, and water that live alongside our world. Long ago, one of our ancestors made a pact, becoming a guardian, a bridge between those worlds. The power, she said, lies dormant, passed down through generations, waiting. It only awakens with an act of great injustice that spills the blood of the air. This power is yours now, she said, pressing the heavy gold earring into my palm. It was cold, just like the scar. The Djinn inside you has woken up, and it is angry about the debt that was created. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but now it had company, a strange and growing sense of purpose. Over the next few days, I learned I'd sit in my room and focus on the cold energy that now seemed to flow from the scar. I'd stare at a candle flame, whispering the words from my dream, and watch the flame bend and dance to my will. I focused on a fallen mango outside, and with a surge of energy, I watched it tremble and roll over. The power was wild and terrifying, but was also undeniably part of me. The meek, invisible nanny was gone for good. In her place, someone new, someone formidable, was waking up. This awakening was not gentle. The power was a torrent, a flood of ancient memories and emotions that belonged to the Djinn and 100 generations of guardians before me. I felt their collective anger at insults long forgotten, their sorrow for pacts that were broken, and their immense, crushing loneliness from being dormant for so long. The power felt less like a gift and more like a heavy, dangerous burden that threatened to consume my own identity. I would lie awake at night, fighting the urge to unleash a storm on the city, terrified that I would lose Isatu to the bottomless rage of the spirit that now shared my soul. This was more than a power. It was a constant, internal war. My grandmother saw the struggle in my eyes and began my true tutelage. She taught me that wielding the power was the easy part. The true challenge is to control and contain it. She explained that the Djinn's concept of justice was absolute, elemental, and utterly without mercy. If I gave in completely to its primal rage, I might not just punish Mashir and Diaya, but obliterate him entirely, an act of annihilation that would permanently stain my own soul and corrupt the sacred pact. My training became a desperate battle for my own humanity against an ancient, elemental fury that saw the world in black and white, dead in payment. Following Meme's guidance, I went to the coast, to the edge of the Atlantic, where the first guardian had made her pact. I practiced in seclusion, feeling the immense pull of the water element she once commanded. I learned to draw strength not just from my anger, but from the ocean itself, feeling the ceaseless ebb and flow of the tides within my own body, a rhythm of power and restraint. There, with the salt spray on my face, I finally understood. Control was not about suppression. It was about achieving a delicate harmony. I had to become a partner to the Djinn, not just its vessel or its puppet. This profound realization solidified my resolve. I would confront Ndiaye, not for simple revenge, but to restore balance and deliver a justice that was my own. Monsieur Ndiaye had humiliated me, but he had done far worse than that. He'd awakened a force he couldn't possibly understand or control, a debt that money could never repay. I knew I had to go back to that cold, sterile mansion. I had to face him, not as his meek and invisible servant, but as his righteous, terrifying reckoning. But before I tell you what happened when I walked through his front door one last time, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You will not want to miss how this story of power and justice unfolds. When I returned to the mansion, I didn't use the servant's entrance. I walked right up the main stone steps and pushed open the heavy front doors. The 2 guards on duty moved to stop me, their faces hard and dismissive. But the second I met their gaze, their expressions went slack, their professional hostility dissolving into a primal confusion. They just froze in place, their hands hovering uselessly over their weapons, their eyes wide with a deep, instinctual fear they couldn't possibly place or comprehend. I had not used power on them, merely let them glimpse the power within me. I walked right past them, my bare footsteps now echoing with impossible weight and authority in the silent, cavernous hall. I found Monsieur Ndiaye in his grand office, screaming into his phone about a shipping container or some other triviality that was the center of his world. He slammed the phone down and finally saw me standing in the doorway, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. What is the meaning of this? How dare you? You are fired. Get out, he bellowed, rising from his massive leather chair, his entire body radiating menace. I didn't even flinch. I just stood there, exuding a deep and profound calm that was infinitely more terrifying than his childish, explosive anger. I slowly held up my arm, displaying the pale, silvery scar his rings had left behind, a mark that now seemed to shine with its own inner light. You owe a debt, I said, and the voice that emerged was not entirely my own. It was layered deep and resonant, as if a chorus of ancient voices was speaking through me in perfect, chilling unison. The moment I said the words, the power I'd been holding in careful, delicate balance unleashed itself into the room. The expensive crystal lamps overhead flickered like crazy before bursting in a shower of brilliant sparks, plunging the room into a deep twilight. The very air grew heavy and cold, thick with ozone and ancient energy. I could hear Monsieur Ndiaye's breath catch in his throat, a sharp, terrified gasp. His eyes darted around the room and landed on the plush rug where the coffee had spilled. The stain began to glow with a faint, angry red light. Steam, smelling of burnt sugar and old rage, started to rise from it. He stumbled backward, all his arrogance and bluster melting away into pure, unadulterated terror. He was no longer a powerful man, but a cornered animal. And then he saw them. Shimmering into existence from the deepest shadows behind me were the spectral figures of women. Women from my family line, standing tall and proud, their eyes all glowing with that same cold, pale light as mine. At their center, standing directly behind me with a spectral, encouraging hand on my shoulder, was a spirit from my dream, the first guardian. Her expression was not one of anger, but of cosmic disappointment. As Monsieur Ndiaye lay whimpering on the floor, a broken man cowering before his own desk, the ancestral spirits surrounding me did not fade. They held their ground like silent, shimmering statues, their glowing eyes fixed on the terrified man, awaiting my command. The air in the room crackled with immense, destructive potential, a power that could level the entire mansion with a single thought. The Djinn within my soul screamed for a final, devastating act of retribution. To strip him of his mind, to shatter his wealth into dust, to leave him as a hollow, empty shell for the rest of his miserable days. For a moment, I felt the temptation, the raw, primal satisfaction it would bring to pay his cruelty back 1,000-fold. I looked around the opulent office, at the fragile glass sculptures and the stacks of financial papers that were the symbols of his power, all of it meaningless ash in the face of what was real. I then looked at the man himself, no longer a giant who towered over me, but pathetic, broken figure weeping on the floor. I remember my grandmother's dire warnings about the permanent staining of my soul. To destroy him utterly, as the Djinn wished, would be to make me a monster just like him, one who ruled through fear and destruction. I finally understood that true strength isn't about unleashing devastation, but about possessing the power to do so and choosing restraint instead. The first guardian, the ancient spirit from my dream, turned her glowing eyes from him to me. Her expression was not a command, but a silent, profound inquiry. This was my choice. This was my first true test as the new guardian. Taking a single deep breath that felt like it calmed the very air in the room, I gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of my head. This simple, quiet gesture was my command, an act of mercy and control far more profound than any display of destructive force. With that decision, I chose my own path, separate from the raw vengeance of the spirit within. The debt would be paid, but on my terms. Monsieur Ndiaye fell back with a choked gasp, crashing heavily against his massive mahogany desk, scattering stacks of papers and knocking over a priceless ceramic vase that shattered on the marble floor. All his money, all his global influence, it was all just meaningless, useless ash in the face of his primal, ancestral power. In that moment, he wasn't a titan of industry. He was just a small, scared man facing a spiritual reality he couldn't possibly comprehend or bargain with. What are you?" he stammered, his voice reduced to a pathetic, trembling whimper that was barely audible. He began babbling incoherently, offering me everything he owned in a desperate plea. His money, his fleet of cars, a hotel on the coast. He even offered half his entire fortune. He begged and pleaded for forgiveness. Not because he was genuinely sorry for his actions, but because he was utterly and completely terrified of what stood before him. The ancient spirit behind me leaned forward, her form shimmering like a heat haze. Her voice was a whisper of wind through baobab leaves and the crashing of distant surf, a sound that only he and I could properly hear. "Your gold cannot pay this debt. The debt is one of respect, a debt of honor, and it must be paid in fear." With those final, damning words, his eyes rolled back in his head. He let out a strangled cry and just collapsed, fainting right there on the floor in a heap. The lights in the room flickered back on as if nothing had happened. The spectral forms of the women behind me faded gracefully back into the shadows from which they came. The ominous, steaming glow from the rug was gone. He was left alone, a whimpering wreck in his personal temple of wealth. My judgment was complete. I looked down at him one last time, not with hate or even pity, but with profound feeling of finality. I hadn't come for his money or his possessions. I had come for his arrogance. I turned and walked away, leaving him in his gilded cage, which was now a permanent prison of his own making, haunted by a fear he could never explain. I stepped out of the mansion and into the brilliant, welcoming Dakar sun. I wasn't Isa to the invisible nanny anymore. The simple blue paint I wore felt like royal robes of office. The repaired string of my grandmother's beads around my neck felt like a crown, a symbol of my heritage and my new responsibility. I hadn't just taken back my dignity in that room. I had reclaimed a legacy far more powerful and valuable than any earthly fortune on the entire planet. He learned that day that some people carry more than just their past. They carry power, lineage, and spirits that you would be wise not to provoke. You never truly know who you are talking to, who you are dismissing, who you are hurting. The world is full of ancient magic, of Djinn and spirits sleeping just on the thin surface of our modern lives. And sometimes all it takes is one careless act of cruelty, one single drop of spilled coffee, to wake it all up and change the world forever. He never saw me again, but the stories say he is a changed man, a quiet, jumpy, haunted man, who now looks at everyone he meets, no matter their station in life, with a flicker of unmistakable fear in his eyes. He is forever wondering what ancient power, what sleeping guardian, might be lying dormant just behind their gaze, waiting for a debt to be made,